President Brian, fellow Rotarians and guests, it's my great pleasure to introduce as our guest speaker today Professor Steve Wesselingh. Professor Wesselingh has been appointed as SAHMRI's South Australian Medical Research, Health and Medical Research Institute's inaugural chairman since December 2010. He has a long history in the medical field, and it's actually all in the bulletin for you to actually read, and I hope you've all read it. But he was graduated from Flinders University, and his actually major fields are in infectious diseases. The good news about Stephen is that he's an Adelaide boy. He was born in Adelaide and actually went to a local Adelaide primary school and a secondary school where he met his wife, and then they have 4 children. He's now come back to Adelaide, residing in Henley Beach. The thing that I have an interest in that is that I'm an Adelaide boy, born in Adelaide and educated at Adelaide University. Stephen went through Flinders University 2 years before I went through Adelaide, so we're both local people, and I hope you're actually interested to hear what Stephen has to say about the SAHMRI Institute. That is the building you can probably all see now as we actually walk into the Adelaide Oval, that they're building on the site of the new Adelaide Hospital. So I hope you give a very warm welcome to Professor Steve Wesselingh.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that kind introduction, and thanks for inviting me to talk today. Although I think it's a pretty hard act to follow, I don't have any jokes, and I actually thought the jokes were pretty good. So, thanks, Steve. so I'm sorry that I'm going to be a little serious, but anyway. So I'm here to talk about SAHMRI and really introduce you to the concept of why we're developing SAHMRI, and I'll see if this works. Can I? Yeah, I just turned on. Yeah. There we go. So what we're trying to do with SAHMRI is develop a flagship medical research institute. And really it comes from the idea that health and medical research has always been very strong in South Australia, but recently the competition, I guess, interstate has grown, the competition internationally has grown. And I think the way South Australia can compete well is by working together. And so some years ago, the Health Minister asked for a review of health and medical research in South Australia, and John Shine, the Director of the Burnet Institute, came down and did that review along with Alan Young, and the Shine-Young review was published, and it indicated that there was a need for a flagship medical research institute to really bring together the medical research in South Australia and to ensure that we could compete particularly with the eastern states, but also internationally. So ultimately, medical research is a global enterprise and we need to compete in that space. But what the review really concentrated on was that places like Melbourne and Sydney and Brisbane had flagship medical research institutes like Weehai, Baker, Burnet, Garvan, QIMR, and these were bringing in some of the best researchers around the country and competing for national competitive research funding, to the extent that currently Melbourne gets 40% of all the medical research funding for Australia, and South Australia gets about 8%. So, and clearly they're not 5 times bigger than we are. So the idea was that we needed to compete better, and as you can see on this slide, the review was conducted, and out of that review grew the idea of a flagship medical research institute, and one with a particular partnership model, so that we had on our board representatives of the 3 universities and the Department of Health. But we were also lucky enough to attract a very good chairman in Raymond Spencer, who's also the chairman of the Economic Development Board. And Raymond, along with the board, has been developing the concept of the flagship. And the idea was that this flagship would be built on the site of the new Royal Adelaide, so that we then developed the Health and Medical Research Precinct that not only had a flagship medical research institute on site, but also had a 700-bed new teaching hospital, and that over time, and I'm very confident about this, that precinct would also attract to the West precinct the other parts of the universities in terms of the medical school from the University of Adelaide, activities of the University of South Australia, and also activities of Flinders University, and in addition some of the activities of CSIRO. So we then start to develop this concept of a very active health and medical research precinct. But it's more than that. It was that the themes that the SAHMRI would develop would be strong on that precinct, but they would incorporate those activities happening all over the state. And so again, to go back to that idea that in South Australia, to compete well in this space, we need to work together. We need to have the three universities working together, we need to have the hospitals working together, and we need to ensure that those themes are working consistently and collaboratively across the state. And obviously in some areas we wouldn't have a large concentration of that activity on the precinct that I just described, because that might be around women's and children, and obviously the women's and children precinct with the hospital in North Adelaide would be where the majority of that would happen, but we would play a role in that space. So we developed a vision of translating science into health. And really what we're saying there, and I'll show some other slides about that, but this we wanted to be particularly at the end of health and medical research where we impacted on health. So we wanted to make sure that even the fundamental biology we were doing had the ability to improve health, particularly for South Australians, but for people all over the world. So the word translational research is a word that's commonly used in health and medical research now, but one that you may be unfamiliar with, but it really means translating the activities of the health and medical researchers into health outcomes, and so that we are very clear that what we're doing ultimately must improve health for South Australians. So these are some of the key highlights, some of which I've mentioned, but the Board of Directors in January 2010, the site groundbreaking in July 2010, the appointment of the Scientific Advisory Committee, which we were lucky enough to get people, eminent scientists from around the country, people like Ian Fraser, who developed the HPV vaccine, Doug Hilton, the director of the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, John Shine, who wrote the report, are all on our Scientific Advisory Committee, making sure that our institute really does adhere to its goal of excellent medical research. And we spent some time thinking about the areas that we would work in. And we decided to work in 6 major areas. And these areas were chosen on 2 criteria. One was the health needs of South Australia and the region, but particularly South Australia. And the second was the strengths that already existed in South Australia. So we wanted to build on strengths that existed in South Australia rather than develop totally new areas. There is one exception up there which I'll talk about in a minute. But we chose cancer and heart disease as 2 themes we would work on because, and I think I could almost guarantee that everyone in this room knows someone who's been affected by cancer or heart disease. They're very common problems in our community, and in addition we actually have some significant strengths in those areas from a research point of view. So we developed those as 2 of our themes, and we have already started to work with the Cancer Council on what's called the Big Cancer Project, which was a development of around $20 million worth of funding from the Cancer Council and the state government and the universities that SAHMRI will utilise to enhance cancer research in the state. When I say utilise that funding, it won't actually come into or for necessarily for SAHMRI researchers, but SAHMRI will play a strategic role in developing cancer research, utilising those monies to really attract very good people to South Australia to sort of be the glue that keeps the research together. And the heart disease theme will be launching in early May, and in the heart disease theme we've attracted an outstanding theme leader from Cleveland Clinic, who again was previously from Adelaide but spent most of his cardiological life at Cleveland Clinic, and he's going to be an outstanding leader of that area. And again, we've started to bring together the cardiology research across the state. The theme leader of the heart disease theme emphasises one of the important things that SAHMRI needs to do, and that is to attract talent to South Australia. And so SAHMRI is about bringing together the very best researchers from South Australia, but also attracting new talent into South Australia, because if we are going to be competitive, we not only need to build on what we've got, but we need to bring in new, dynamic researchers who are going to, as I said, compete particularly with the eastern states in terms of national funding. So you can see on this slide that we also have healthy mothers, babies and children, and that is a particular strength in South Australia, and outstanding research conducted at the Women's and Children's Hospital. And again, SAHMRI will work very closely with the Robinson Institute and the Women's and Children's Hospital in that regard. Nutrition and metabolism, South Australia gets about 70% of all the nutrition funding federally, so that is a particular strength, and CSIRO play in that space in South Australia as well. And SAHMRI will be bringing together the 3 universities and CSIRO into our nutrition theme. And then infection and immunity at the bottom is an area that South Australia's done very good work in, and actually that's the area that I've worked in for most of my career, so I had to have a theme there for me to do some work in, I guess. And then I jumped over mind and brain. South Australia has been good in neuroscience, but actually Australia and generally the world has been very bad at mental health research. And that's the space that I want to grow around the mind and brain, so that sort of get rid of that sort of dichotomy between the sort of biology and the mental health, but really get an understanding of what generates poor mental health and how we can intervene in that space. And that's an area that I'd like to see grow. There's a couple of places around Australia that do it okay, but I think that's a space that is an important need in South Australia and across the country, and one we can play in. Importantly, on the slide you can see Indigenous health go right across all the areas, and I think you would all understand that for us to have a separate Indigenous health theme probably wouldn't be, I don't think, appropriate, because what really happens in Indigenous health, that those themes up there all impact on Indigenous health. So cancer is a problem in Indigenous communities, heart disease is a problem, diabetes is a problem, mental health issues are a problem, infections are a problem. And so our Indigenous, we will expect all our themes to play some role in improving Indigenous health. But to ensure that's happened, we've recruited a head of Indigenous health for SAHMRI, someone called Dr. Alex Brown, and Alex is currently working in Alice Springs, and he's going to be an outstanding Indigenous health researcher for us, and so we're very excited about that. So the other aspect of SAHMRI which we wanted to really emphasise was that it's going to engage with the community. We want the community engaged with SAHMRI, and when I show you some pictures of the building, you'll see that even the building is designed so that the building sort of floats above the plaza, and that we want people to be in and around the building. And we'll have a pod, what we're calling the education pod, as part of our building, where we hope kids and adults can walk through and see displays around issues of health and medical research, or just see displays of what's happening in the building, and talk to our people and encourage them to be involved in science, maths and other areas in the curriculum. So we really do want to play a role in encouraging kids to get into this area, but also we want to know what the community thinks we should be doing and what are the concerns of the community, so that we can ensure that the circle of translation occurs, so that we're not only addressing issues and problems that we're identifying, but issues and problems that the community identifies. So the facility, as I mentioned, is only part of SAHMRI, but it is an important part because it will be iconic. It will be a fabulous looking building, and as you can see, it's already coming out of the ground. One of the problems we have is a lot of people think that's the Royal Adelaide Hospital, and I just want to emphasise to all of you, that's not the Royal Adelaide Hospital, that's SAHMRI, and we'll be up and open at least a couple of years before the Royal Adelaide is up and open, and even by the end of this year, when the sort of scaffolding comes down, you'll start to see a pretty impressive building. So this slide just shows the interaction between our building and the Royal Adelaide. That building is actually the Royal Adelaide, not built yet, and we're just to the side. And you can see the relationship there between SAHMRI and the Royal Adelaide. And I'll just flick to some of the pictures. This is what it will look like actually from about here, I guess, looking across the Torrens at night. So the architects are pretty clever in terms of generating these pictures for us. And this is the foyer. And so what we're trying to create is an inspirational building, one that inspires the best minds in South Australia, inspires creativity, and as I said, really engages both the researchers and the public. And there'll be lots of, the building is designed with a lot of open space, very few offices, and obviously laboratory space, animal houses, cyclotron. Just want to quickly emphasise the cyclotron. I know I'm not supposed to talk for too long, but Adelaide currently doesn't have a way of making radioisotopes, which are important in terms of scanning and other medical activities. We import them from Victoria. It means they have to come on a plane. They have a short half-life, which means if the plane doesn't fly, then the PET scans get cancelled in Adelaide. So we, as part of our planning for the building, are putting a cyclotron in the basement, which will supply the radioisotopes to all the PET scans in South Australia. So again, that's engagement with health and with the public. So I'm very excited about this project, which is why I've returned to Adelaide from Melbourne. I think it's exciting for a number of reasons. Firstly, I love buildings and new buildings, so it's a really exciting building, and I think Adelaide's going to be very proud of the building. But actually it's more exciting because I think the other things are actually more exciting than the building, and that is to create a flagship medical research institute utilising the strengths of research that exist in Adelaide, but really working as a partnership. And we were just discussing earlier that if South Australia was to compete in any area, we need to work together, and if we have competition across the city rather than collaboration, we're not going to compete. But I think SAHMRI can bring together the researchers from across the state. I think by choosing our areas, by ensuring we have the very best infrastructure, the very best technologies, working together, we can be really competitive. What does that mean for South Australia? Well, it means we can be proud of our health and medical research, but more than that, it means that our health delivery will be better. It means we attract better researchers to South Australia, but even more importantly, better clinicians as well, because clinicians want to come where the best health is, where the best research is, and we'll be able to attract those people to South Australia. So the combination of that sort of partnership approach and the iconic building is really very exciting, and I thank you for the opportunity to tell you about it, and I hope you share some of the excitement with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Wesselingh. We have time for questions, so...
Thank you, Professor. I'm really interested in this field, and I just wondered what will happen to organisations like the Hanson Medical Research Institute, or whatever it's called, at Royal Adelaide now, and the equivalent one at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital.
Right, so yes, so the questions around the Hanson and the Hetzel. So the research organisations, particularly the ones based at the Queen Elizabeth and Flinders, will stay there and continue, but we will obviously collaborate, and I've been down to the Hetzel and spoken to them about particular areas of research that we could work together on. The Hanson is a little more complex, and it's not really my place to talk about, nor do I know exactly, because there's going to be a lot of redevelopment on that site as the Royal Adelaide, old Royal Adelaide closes and the new Royal Adelaide opens. But in the interim, the Hansen will continue, and again, we'll be collaborating with the Hansen. So it's really so I guess there's a physical question about the Hansen Institute, but the issue around their research is that, for instance, they do a lot of very good cancer research, and we're working very closely with them on that cancer research. Our big cancer project funds quite a lot of the research there, and we anticipate that our cancer theme leader will be collaborating with and already knows very well a number of the people there. So really what I'm trying to say is we'll be enhancing cancer research and be working closely with the Hansen to do that, given that they do a significant portion of cancer research already in South Australia.
There has been some concern expressed about the moving of your institute to opposite the Newmarket in terms of the university medical school and students having to travel further, and this will cause a lot of inconvenience. Do you have a response to that issue?
Sure. So I guess once the decision was made for the Royal Adelaide to move to that site, that had to be the site where the institute was as well. In regard to the movement of the Royal Adelaide, that's a decision that's been made. I actually think it's a good decision. I think that it would have been very difficult to renovate the Royal Adelaide, and this will be truly one of the best health and medical research precincts, well, it will be the best health and medical research precinct in the country, with a new 700-bed teaching hospital, taking into account a lot of the technological changes that could never be incorporated into the old hospital, dealing with a lot of the infection control and other issues that old hospitals have. In regard to your particular question, which I think is a very valid one around the medical school, I think it's very likely, I don't want to speak for the Dean of the Medical School, although I talk to him regularly, that the medical school will move to the new site. And so that, so you will have a site on which you have a hospital, a new hospital, a new flagship medical research institute, and a newly sited medical school. And I don't think that can be beaten in the country, actually.
Is your organisation bringing together only government-based research units, or is it going to encourage either one way or another for non-government organisations to join you?
Right, so just one very important point, which you reminded me of, you didn't ask, but you reminded me of, is we are an independent medical research institute. So the SAHMRI, the SA at the beginning means that we're in South Australia, but doesn't mean we're part of the government. And so we're an independent company, limited by guarantee. In terms of the researchers that we'll be working with and bringing together, I think it's very important that we work with some of the developments, particularly in Theberton, in terms of bionomics and other private developments, which again I think South Australia has done very well, but there is a need to grow that. I don't think that we're thinking as well as we should around biotechnology, bioinnovations, even though Bioinnovations SA I think has been doing a good job around medical devices, those sorts of developments, and SAHMRI would be very keen, and I would expect SAHMRI to be involved in those developments. The other thing SAHMRI will do as well is develop the infrastructure to help those. So for instance, we'll be playing an important role around preclinical testing and that sort of stuff that allows drugs and devices to get to the market.
With 1 in 4 South Australians diagnosed with some form of arthritis, why wasn't musculoskeletal diseases part of your research themes?
Right. Did someone put you up to that question? It's a good and valid question, and we certainly do see. And the other question that someone might say is, why don't we have an ageing theme, for instance? I guess the answer is that I see a number of the aspects that are associated with ageing and with musculoskeletal issues to be covered in the areas that we've already covered, particularly around inflammation, which I expect will be one of the major focuses of the infection immunity theme, and obviously incorporating some of the other themes. But I guess I also have to say that it was a very difficult process in deciding the themes. The Research Advisory Committee started the process about 3 years ago and then gave me the work they did, and then I proceeded with the process. We couldn't incorporate all parts of medical research. And in fact, Doug Hilton, and Doug won't mind me saying this, he's on our Research Advisory Committee, he said we should have narrowed down to 2 or 3 areas rather than to 6. And so it was a matter of combining, focus as well as covering what we thought were critical issues and strengths. But I would expect, I know a lot about the activities, particularly some of the really good surgical research ongoing and rheumatological research, and I would hope that we keep that in mind as we develop, as I mentioned, some of the platform technologies and infrastructure, so that although it won't be one of our themes, I hope our research imaging capacity will be really important to that area. I hope some of our preclinical and large animal work will be important to that area. So we will be taking into account, and another example would be the burns and skin work that's been ongoing in South Australia, which is just terrific. We haven't got that as a theme, but we're working with the surgeons there to make sure that we have the capability to help them move their burns and skin work into routine care. So that, yes, it's a valid question. It's a difficult question, but that's how we came to the conclusion.
This one have to be our last question.
I'm just wondering about the IMVS. That is only where it is because the Adelaide is where it is, and it will wither and I think die, isn't it? Won't it become a question of availability of finance, IMVS and Hansen, all those linked to the RAH will disappear and be incorporated in your institution?
Right. So the IMVS, which is now, as you know, SA Pathology, is and will continue to be incorporated in the plans for the New Royal Adelaide. So they'll have laboratories in the New Royal Adelaide, but they're also looking and planning for the future in terms of where they should be located, as well as inside the new hospital, because obviously there'll be constraints on space in the new hospital. So that might be that they stay where they are, it might be that they come to the site in a separate building, it might be that they look at a site in Thevenard. I'm not privy actually to those discussions or the conclusions. I've told you what I am privy to, and they're discussing a number of options. In terms of the research, I think that you're making a very important point though about the research, and that is the pathology associated research needs to continue to be associated with the pathology and with the patients. And I certainly believe that, and I will be working to make sure SAHMRI supports the ongoing research within SA Pathology, because once you separate research out of pathology, you're no longer answering the right questions in terms of the sort of research that the IMVS or SA Pathology have done in the past. So I do think they're an important player. We're working very closely with them, and I want to ensure the survival of their research activities.
Thank you very much, Professor Stephen Wesselingh. On behalf of the Devon Rotary, the Adelaide Rotary Club, that's where I spent the last 28 years, and I'm sorry. I just want to put an advertisement for SAHMRI. If you log on to SAHMRI's website, you can get access to their bulletin, which is actually emailed to some of the members already of this club. So if you want to see the progress that actually SAHMRI makes in South Australia, you can actually access that. But on behalf of the club, I want to thank Professor Stephen Wesselingh, and obviously your goal was to attract great minds to South Australia, and it's already achieved it in having its first great mind here. So could we all give our thanks to Professor Stephen Wesselingh and accept this on behalf of the Adelaide Rotary Club.